Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, do we have a problem at the southern border?
We certainly have a very significant challenge. Yes, we do.
Previously, you've characterized that as not a crisis. Are you willing to say today that there is a crisis at the southern border?
Congressman, I have said now repeatedly it's a crisis, and I have never minimized the severity of the challenge at the border, regardless of the words that are used.
Appreciate the evolution on that. With 200,000 fentanyl deaths, 1.7 million non-citizens being paroled into the country, and migrant crises in multiple cities, including New York City. How grave is the crisis at the southern border?
Congressman, the situation is grave. It requires solutions, and I strongly support and urge Congress to pass the Senate's bipartisan legislation.
We're going to get into that in a moment, Mr. Secretary. My colleague from the other side of the aisle, from the county to my west, mentioned how some solutions are complicated. I would offer on this, there are some simple solutions which ought to be implemented. And I find it disingenuous that many folks from the other side of the aisle often point to budgetary reasons as why we can't have a secure border. So I want to talk about some non-budgetary reasons, including President Biden's policy choices, specifically his executive orders that he's either issued or rescinded. I think the clerk may have a copy of 64 different, we'll get you on, Mr. Secretary, 64 different executive orders that President Biden has issued that have either rolled back Trump-era border policies that many agree have been successful or implemented some that have made your job more difficult. In the entirety of the 4 years in the Trump administration, there were 2.4 million encounters in this, on the southwest border. In the first 40 months of the Biden administration, there were 7.6 million encounters at the southwest border. So comparatively speaking, 200% more in 20% less of a time. Should the Department of Homeland Security endeavor to have less alien encounters at the southwest border?
In between the ports of entry, we are driving to reduce the number of encounters. Yes, indeed, we are.
So it's a goal of yours to have less encounters?
Yes.
Great. Do less encounters lead to less non-citizens being paroled into the country?
Yes, Congressman.
Great. If there are less non-citizens paroled into the country, will there be less migrant crises like the ones in New York?
Congressman, the source of the challenge in New York City is varied. One source of that is a public official's decision to deliberately not communicate.
I'm going to reclaim my time, Mr. Secretary. The question was, does less encounters at the border lead to less migrant crises? I'm going to offer that the answer to the question is yes. You may have a different opinion. The focus I'd like to have is on the Remain in Mexico policy, which was when President Biden announced that he was rescinding the Remain in Mexico policy. What do you think went through the mind of a migrant from Central or South America, many of whom come here for economic reasons? What do you think went through the mind of that migrant who now know that if he or she made it to the southern border, that they would be granted entry, more likely to be granted entry into the country?
Congressman, I believe that the Remain in Mexico policy, throughout its duration, I believe, and I'll verify this, approximately 70,000 migrants ran through it in the 2 years it was in operation. And so I think that you are overemphasizing.
Let me ask you a different question about Remain in Mexico. Why do it? Why repeal Remain in Mexico? What is the value to border security by repealing the policy?
Congressman, it was not an effective policy. It was causing a tremendous amount of human tragedy south of our border. And because it was bad policy, it was rescinded.
So your testimony is the 200% increase of migrant encounters at the southwest border in 20% less time is because of COVID?
No, Congressman, I have not testified to that. The situation and the reasons for it are quite varied. The fact of the matter is that the world is experiencing the greatest displacement of people since World War II, and our hemisphere is not spared that reality.
I'm going to reclaim my time. Mr. Chairman, President Biden should go back to the successful Trump-era border policies. The Senate should take up H.R. 2, the only bill that has passed either chamber in this town. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman